This is work that reflects contributions of Peter Cookson and Kathy Eden. And what I'm going to be talking about is our work to try to ramp up the qualitative infrastructure for monitoring poverty and evaluating poverty policy. So what Tim talked about and what Charles talked about was all about efforts to ramp up our quantitative infrastructure. Of course, those efforts are immensely important, but now I want to turn to the qualitative side. And our objective in both cases is to make sure that both the qualitative and quantitative infrastructures are living up to their promise. And the argument would be that we're entering an era, I think, in which there are going to be fundamental changes in the type of poverty that we're seeing. We're also entering an era in which there are real changes in our capacities to measure and monitor, and we want to make sure we're exploiting those new capacities and making sure we can capture the changes that are likely in store. So the backdrop in terms of moving to the qualitative side is that clearly these qualitative studies are immensely influential. I've just randomly sampled from all the Kathys who've contributed to the qualitative tradition. But
it's a prerequisite.
Yeah. There are some non-Kathys too who have done pretty amazing work. It's hard to say which line of work, the quantitative or qualitative, that have more impact or influence on our policy. Both have been really influential. So what might we do then to ramp up this qualitative side? And you might say that the current qualitative infrastructure is optimized for discovery, for induction, for generating hypotheses. And what we want to do is to develop a new parallel form of qualitative inquiry that's optimized for monitoring, testing, and policy development. That's a bit pat, but I think there's some truth in that distinction. And the ambition, and this is Kathy's words. I like to think that I'm ambitious, but Kathy's labeled what we want to do is a qualitative census. So what would be the features of this qualitative census? First off, representativeness. The claim here is there's nothing distinctive in the qualitative tradition that precludes representative samples of those in poverty. Nothing distinctive. That's a path-dependent development, and that there's no reason to be wed to that, and that we can insist and should insist on representativeness in this second brand, if you will, of qualitative work. Of course, the first brand is immensely successful. I just made that argument, and so no one would want to change something that's working so well. We're just arguing here that there should be a second brand, and that second brand should have, as one of its features, an insistence on representativeness. Secondarily, it's important to stratify by levels of poverty. There's lots of evidence to suggest that we really care about extreme poverty, deep poverty, regular poverty, near poverty. We've talked about that, and so we want to stratify on those levels. Third point, we want a non-poverty comparison group. Again, typically in the qualitative tradition, not always, but typically in the qualitative tradition, you don't have that non-poverty comparison group. And that means that when we observe behaviors within the poverty group, we don't know if it's distinctive to that group or is something that holds more widely. One of the fundamentals of science is, of course, a comparison group, and so we think this second brand should insist on that non-poverty group. Point 4, place-based. If there's anything that we've learned over the last several decades, it's how important place is. And so the approach that we're going to be taking is to identify the key ideal types that are rooted in place, ideal types of poverty, and then try to locate places that best represent that ideal in as pristine a form as possible, recognizing, of course, that all realizations are going to be hybrid forms, but we would like, to the extent possible, to identify where a particular form takes on, approximates at least that ideal type, and can give us insights into how that form of poverty plays out. And then finally, we want comparable protocols to be administered across these types, across these places and also across the different levels of poverty, thereby allowing us to compare both across place and across level. And again, the claim here is that as important as that first brand of qualitative work is, and you know, its payoff has been immense, there's returns to going beyond the one-off study and making it possible to effect comparisons. And that means we want a comparable protocol. Okay, so those are the prerequisites as we see it for a qualitative census. So how are we going to attempt to realize those commitments? Well, first off, we've identified 14 communities in the U.S. and now there are also additionally 7 communities in Canada that represent the many different types of poverty. And I've listed some of them here. We have deindustrializing poverty. Of course, you would think instantly to Detroit. There's housing cost poverty, that type of poverty that is induced in large part by living in places in which housing costs are just overwhelmingly high. There's poverty on reservations. That's a very important type of poverty, which arguably is distinctive. There's, of course, suburban poverty, agricultural poverty, a highly racialized type of poverty, rural white poverty, rural black poverty, new immigrant poverty. There are other types as well, but this gives you a sense of what we're trying to do. And I should say that as we've gone forward in developing the North American Poverty Study, there have been many other areas that have asked, could they join this study? We feel overwhelmed as it stands with the types that we've already identified, and so at this point we're not going to add any new places, but there's lots of interest. And our hope and aspiration is that as we ramp this up, other places that nicely represent other types, because there's no claim here that we're exhausting all the important types, other places that represent other types will as long as they commit to the protocol and hence comparability can be achieved, then they can be brought on board. And then I should say that we'll be stratifying again by level of poverty. So we'll have representative samples of those in deep poverty, regular poverty, near poverty, and of course a middle class comparison group. And then the protocol, well, it's going to be based on the Making Ends Meet protocol, but taking into account all that Kathy and her many wonderful co-authors have learned since the Making Ends Meet book. So that means we're going to have a protocol that taps the life history and defining life course events of the folks, the rhythm of their everyday life, the availability and closeness of friends and relatives, a detailed breakdown of expenses and income from all sources, formal, informal, and illegal jobs that have been and are typically held, the extent of economic hardship and the reactions to that hardship, mental health, anxiety, and stress. And Kathy is going to be delivering common interviewer training so we can make sure that across all of these places, the same protocol is being followed, and hence there will be the kind of comparability that allows us to go beyond the one-off study and actually make comparisons across types of poverty and across levels of poverty. If you want to learn more, you can go to nationalpovertystudy.org for details about how this initiative is playing out. So what will it deliver? I'm going to focus a lot on validity assessments because that's one of the themes of this conference, but then I'll talk about some other payoffs as well. So on the validity front, you might want to know whether or not the SPM thresholds are right in the sense that they accord with what might be called ground truth. Although I think that's a bit of a misnomer. There are many truths in play, but a very important truth is that which is revealed in these everyday observations that are affected through the Making Ends Meet protocol and our adjustment of it. You want to know also whether or not all the various adjustments of the threshold are right. Are the cost of living adjustments working in the sense that they accord with the experience of poverty that we see on the ground? Are the OPM thresholds right? Likewise, you want to know whether or not there's a qualitative difference between deep poverty, regular poverty, and near poverty. And most importantly, we want to know whether or not those thresholds And those differences in the levels of poverty are playing out in similar ways across places. It strikes me as difficult to understand why we haven't attempted this validity exercise today. We have a lot resting on our poverty measurement protocol, and this kind of assessment of whether or not it actually accords with what we see on the ground strikes me as something that we should have been doing long ago. We certainly should start doing now, and the costs that are involved, substantial though they are, pale in comparison to the cost of making a mistake on this front. What about the other payoffs? Well, you can certainly evaluate how programs are being used by those who are in poverty. You know, our SNAP, TANF, unemployment insurance, other programs being used on the ground in the ways that we think. What are the myths about eligibility that are in play? How are programs being combined? How might they be improved? We know a lot about this already based on the immensely powerful one-off studies that have already been carried out. But what we know less about, I would argue, is whether or not our answers that we think we know are going to hold across all the various types of poverty and across all the various different levels of poverty. So the larger question is, we run a one-size-fits-all policy regime in the US, right? We presume that across all these various types of poverty, pretty much the same policy is working. And so we'll be able to provide an answer to whether or not indeed one-size-fits-all policy is working as we think and hope it does. New interventions. I think as we move into this new world of poverty in which we try to deal with rising joblessness, deal with increasing economic precarity, deal with rising economic segregation. As we move into this new world of poverty, we need to know how the poverty population is responding. These changes I think are going to be happening pretty quickly, and we need to have our observatories on the ground so that we can understand how the poverty population is reacting to these changes, and whether or not we need to in response change our policy. We'll be able to monitor the effects of crises. If we had had this in play during the Great Recession, we would have known much sooner how the poverty population was responding to the recession. We could have altered our response accordingly. So we'll have an early warning system. And of course, for those committed to science, we'll be able to develop new theories, test key conclusions that are based on one-off studies, conclusions that are now part of our lore, but certainly could benefit from more rigorous testing. In the best of all possible worlds, this is perhaps even more ambitious than anyone would like to imagine, but you could hope that someday this could be integrated with the AOS, and that we wouldn't have to try to secure the quantitative measurements in the context of the actual protocol, but rather could link up with, of course, all security precautions in place, link up with administrative data. So what are the next steps? We're building a coalition of funders, US and Canadian foundations, local funders, universities. We're going to move toward a final set of meetings where we finalize the protocol and settle all sorts of methodological problems that still are on the table, and we can talk about those, but that we think are all solvable. And our hope is to get into the field before the next recession. That's our game plan. That's our aspiration. Thank you very much.